This episode is brought to you by Claude by Anthropic. Claude is the AI for minds that don't stop at good enough. It's the collaborator that actually understands your entire workflow and thinks with you. Whether you're debugging code at midnight or strategizing your next business move, Claude extends your thinking to tackle the problems that matter and finds connections you might have missed. For problems worth solving, get started at claude.ai/Spotify.
Good morning, it's Tuesday, August 4, and this is the Brussels Playbook podcast. The vibe in Brussels today is fractious as the fallout from the Ceuta incident continues to roil Europe. Home Affairs ministers are meeting this morning and will preview what different countries are expected to say. Also on the pod, drought in Hungary and Romania risks triggering energy crises, and Belgium is testing its first year of voluntary military service for 18 to 25-year-olds, and the program is fully booked. I'm Zoya Sheftalovich, and with me today is Senior EU Politics Editor Ian Wishart. Hey, Ian.
Hello, Zoya. Would you sign up?
Ooh, yes, I would.
You'd fight for your country?
I think yes. You?
No, I think I'd be too scared. I'd run away. I'd hide in a hole until the war was over.
I'd be, probably not on the front lines because I don't think anyone would want me, wielding a Kalashnikov, but I'd be at the back, telling people what to do, as I like to. Ian, Home Affairs ministers are going to be meeting from around about 10 o'clock this morning, and they're going to be discussing what's happened in Ceuta over the past week and the EU response to it.
Sort of 48 hours of diplomacy here, because obviously yesterday the ambassadors met, today the ministers meet online, isn't it? Rather than they're not all coming to Brussels, not quite big enough a crisis for that.
No, I've had text messages from people saying, I'm dialing in from the Alps, I'm dialing in from a beach. So, yeah.
There's obviously been a lot of public backlash against Spain and the Spanish government, but you rang around a lot of diplomats after the meeting of ambassadors last night, and it sounds a bit more subtle, a bit more nuanced than perhaps the public statements would imply.
Yeah, I think over the weekend we had these rival letters flying around from Pedro Sanchez, the Spanish Prime Minister, basically accusing other EU leaders of lacking solidarity in response to the crisis. Then these 22 leaders who said, well, look, your migration policies are to blame for the fact that these migrants decided that they wanted to come to Ceuta. So that was quite accusatory. And certainly last night, the meeting among the ambassadors, it got, I spoke with some diplomats. They said it was at times, there was a bitterness from Spain because they were quite upset about the lack of...
They do think there's been a lack of solidarity from the other leaders.
They do. And they think there's a double standard at play as well. So when I was speaking with people in the Spanish Foreign Ministry in Madrid, as well as diplomats here, they were saying, well, look, there was such a difference in tone from EU leaders when you looked at the response to this Ceuta crisis versus, say, what happened at Lampedusa with Italy versus what happened with Belarus instrumentalizing migrants.
Two big influxes of migrants in the last 10 years or so, where straight away the EU has shown solidarity.
Yeah, and so Spain is a bit upset about that. But I think today things are going to move beyond that a little bit. Certainly the expectation is that Spain will raise these issues again and say, look, we're not impressed with the way that you've responded. But there is also this sense of okay, we need to move forward and consider what can be done to prevent a repeat of this crisis again. Because, of course, we've got to remember this isn't even the first Ceuta crisis because there was that 2021 big mass arrival. Not on this scale in quite the same way, but this is a repeating issue.
The EU gets a lot of criticism for, there's a crisis, let's hold a meeting. But actually what that does do is take the sting out of things, actually. And rather than getting politicians trading insults, they sit around a big table, 27 of them, try to find a way forward. And actually what comes out of it is quite staid, dull, sort of process things. And it sounds like the same things happening here, where they're talking about, I think you heard last night, that they're now going forward to the October European Council with some proposals, perhaps.
That's right. So I think my expectation, this is based on my reporting from the various calls I've had, I think what's going to come out of this meeting today is firstly, the European Commission will probably go away and work on some proposals, some additional migration proposals. Now, remember, it was only this year that the Asylum and Migration Pact actually has come into force. So we already have very recent EU legislation on this topic. But there is a view that that legislation doesn't actually deal specifically with these instances where there's a massive crisis where tens of thousands of people might show up, whether that's because of something that has happened or maybe some sort of instrumentalization, the way that the Belarus thing happened. So there is a request from EU countries for the Commission to go away and potentially look into what it can do. And the Commission is going to do that. And I reckon it seems like they're probably going to come up with something in the fall, maybe September, in time for that European Council summit where all of the EU's leaders are going to gather in October and they want to have something on the table.
It looks less of a crisis 2 months down the line, doesn't it?
It does, but then that being said, something that one of the diplomats I spoke to said was, look, this really puts into stark relief the extent to which migration is a priority area for European governments. And so I think this pushes that up.
It's going to become more and more so as well. You know, the pressure on Europe's borders is ever greater. It's ever higher on the political agenda. You get leaders and far-right governments coming in more and more around Europe, and they're going to make it an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And the EU wants to head that off. And so that's...
has to respond to it somehow, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's why we think there's probably going to be some proposals. And maybe one of the things that I know specifically was mentioned yesterday was the idea of strengthening Frontex, which is the EU's border agency. So I think we're probably going to see something on that.
Well, speaking of proposals, can I read you something which the Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis is writing for Politico today? He's written an opinion piece. And some of the things he's asking for are actually quite radical, or certainly extreme, people might think. One of the paragraphs he says is that Europe has to be honest about the limits of its fast-track asylum procedures. In clearly defined exceptional situations of extreme and disproportionate pressure, whether at land borders or following mass arrivals by sea, member countries should be given the option under a dedicated EU emergency regime to temporarily suspend asylum applications for newly arrived persons while proceeding with the swift return of those not entitled to remain. This is a serving prime minister from an important EU member state calling for really much more significant measures than is currently the case.
Yeah, and in this op-ed, which I really do encourage our listeners to read in full because it's quite interesting, he basically says what the EU actually needs is some sort of actual process, a mechanism, a proposal of some kind, which is set to deal with this mass arrival when it happens, and specifically to deal and respond to the instrumentalization thing, which is, I mean, that's just a fancy way of saying when a government, basically to get revenge or to punish an EU country or the EU as a whole, sends a bunch of migrants into the EU on purpose. And that's what Belarus was accused of doing when it was sending a bunch of migrants across the border into the Baltics.
So Zoya, when we're talking about instrumentalization, is there any evidence that Morocco used this as sort of a deliberate attempt to get its people across the border?
No, there isn't. And this is something that's really important to actually highlight because Spain, the Commission, EU countries, they are really keen to say that Morocco has been cooperating, it has been taking the migrants back, it's been working with the EU to resolve this crisis. So I think they're very, very interested in keeping that cooperation going. And there hasn't been any kind of report or evidence to show that Morocco did anything untoward. That said, I think the Commission is expected to go away and look into this. And if there is some suggestion that Morocco did something on purpose, then I think that will come out later on down the track, maybe in the fall, when we might expect to see the result of an investigation.
Okay, good, Zoya. Well, the meeting of the Interior Ministers, the online meeting, is today. You'll find out, no doubt, what they've said behind closed doors.
Yeah, and actually, I should say, Ian, it's not just the EU's Interior Ministers. This meeting is going to also have representatives from other countries that are in the Schengen zone,
right,
but are not in the EU,
right,
as well as, of course, the European Commission's Migration Commissioner Brunner and a few other folks are going to be there as well, okay. EAS people and such.
Keep an eye, everyone, on the Politico website, and we'll bring you the latest on what happens, and I'm sure we might speak about it again tomorrow.
We may do. Ian, our next story is a bit of a change of pace. It's about this drought that has hit parts of Europe, which obviously...
Cheered us up anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, from one crisis to another, eh?
Yeah.
So Hungary and Romania are having some pretty severe problems with their nuclear power plants because the Danube River, the level has fallen so low that they can't cool them properly.
This plant, this nuclear power plant in Hungary, accounts for 40% of Hungary's electricity generation.
Yeah, and basically the Hungarian Prime Minister Peter Magyar has said that, he said just a couple of days ago that he thought maybe he would have to already have closed the plant down entirely. At the moment, one reactor is still operating, but any moment now it could, in fact, by the time people listen to this, it may even have been switched off because it all depends on the weather. And it is a huge problem for Hungary because so much of its energy comes from this nuclear power plant. So the government is actually asking people to reduce their energy use as much as possible, and industry as well, so that they can survive.
A really tangible consequence of the climate crisis, isn't it? You know, climate crisis has been talked about for many years now, but we're beginning to see really how it hits normal people.
Yeah.
Surely that's going to result in changes in politics and who people vote for.
You would think, and Romania is having a lot of trouble as well. So its nuclear power plant is also in a similar situation. It's also kind of running low on the cooling water. They've actually had to blast a bunch of rocks out of the way. So
I saw the video. Yeah, there was a controlled explosion, weren't there?
Yeah, it's amazing.
In order for the water to flow better, I think, and they could use it more to cool their,
and of
their
course,
nuclear power plant.
The problem with any sort of energy shortage at this period in time is Europe is struggling under this very intense heat wave. I've been absolutely roasting.
Have you? Well, that's the main story.
Yeah, you should take my temperature.
Why didn't we start talking about that?
I know. Well, so governments have actually urged households and businesses to not use energy between 5 and 10 p.m., which is the hottest part of the day in Europe, or at least in my house.
Anywhere, really. Yeah. It's quite, it happens summer after summer now. Huge, big, historic rivers in Europe, the Danube, the Rhine, start to dry out and expose things that people didn't realize were under the water. There's some German shipwrecks from the Second World War has been exposed in the Danube. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is really interesting the way that this, every time the climate crisis is made more and more real to us, isn't it? So what the Commission is doing, it said it's monitoring the situation, and this will shock you, Ian.
Yeah, a meeting? All right.
It might convene an emergency meeting of its electricity coordination group if needed. Ian, last one for today. Last year, the Belgian Defence Ministry announced that it was going to have this new initiative where you could volunteer for military service if you're aged 18 to 25.
And it's fully booked.
Yeah. The kids are loving it.
500 of them.
Yeah, all 500 spaces have been taken. Around about 80% of the spaces are going to men, 20% to women. And apparently there were over 3,000 applications.
And I'm told 283 are from Flanders and 217 are French speaking. Is that because the Flemish are a bit more warlike?
I don't know.
Are they warriors?
I don't know. Are they warriors? WhatsApp us if this is wrong. Well, in any case, this is what they're going to be doing, Ian. They're going to be spending a full year as full-time reservists in either the Navy, the Army, or the Air Force. This
project came about after the Ukraine crisis because Belgium realised it was struggling to recruit enough to its military.
Yeah.
So it shows that, packaging can work, actually.
Yeah. It's pretty decent conditions. Salaries around €2,000 net. And they're going to get housing and meal vouchers, transport, access to healthcare. So I can see that it would be appealing to folks. Anyway, Belgium has been struggling to fill its military ranks, and the Defence Minister Theo Franken said that he wants to expand the number of reservists from 6,600 to around about 20,000. So it's a pretty big increase.
But he has announced, I read, that medical requirements to join the army are going to be relaxed.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, that's reassuring, isn't it? Not every soldier, he said, has to meet the same extremely strict standards. If, for example, your eyesight's not perfect, that's not necessarily a problem unless you want to become an F-35 pilot.
I think that's pretty
pragmatic. In which case, it would be a problem.
Yeah, it would be. But I think that's a pragmatic approach.
I feel like we haven't had much of a laugh today, Zoya. Some very serious topics.
Yeah, there are. What I'd love to do is I actually genuinely would love to hear from people who might be taking part in one of these programs, whether they've joined up voluntary service in Belgium or Germany or elsewhere. Tell us, what's your reasons? Do you like it? What kind of food are you eating? That's what I'd like to know. Is it good or is it gross? Is it slop or have we now moved on from slop? right, Ian, that's about it from us today. But actually, we've had some interesting little messages that have come in, specifically a voice note about last week's discussion about Croatian and Montenegro.
Oh, lovely. I did find that very interesting, what the difference was between the two languages. We're going to find out.
Yeah, our listener Saba has messaged to say that while they are mutually intelligible, there are some differences. So
mutually intelligible like us.
It's not what you said to me yesterday. All right, let's listen to what Saba has to say.
Hi, team. As a Montenegrin, I decided to follow up with a couple of words in Montenegrin and Croatian, which are not a matter of sound, but they sound completely different. So one thing is airport. So in Montenegro, we would say aerodrom, while in Croatia, it is zračna luka, which means literally an airport. We would say ekonomija. Croatian would say gospodarstvo. So there are more than just sound differences. I think there is a bit of a difference in the way the language has been approached. We do use a lot of foreign loan words. Croatians did invest a lot in creating their own more Slavic sounding words, but they are very much different languages, more than just a couple of sounds that have been added. Thanks a lot for covering this topic, and if you need anything else, let me know.
Fascinating, Saba. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I love our listeners so much.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing what people have to say about today's discussion too. Folks, you can leave us a voice note just like Saba did. That's it from us today. I will be back with you tomorrow.
Your team just added its 67th AI tool, and also your 67th security blind spot. The good news? The Vanta agent works like a GRC engineer in the background, finding every app your team uses, scoring the risk, and drafting fixes for you. Vanta is the platform used by over 16,000 fast-moving companies like Ramp, Cursor, and Harvey, who are shaping the future with AI and staying ahead of AI risk. Get started at Vanta.com.